In 1547, the group of Jesuits that Ignatius had sent to Padua was going through a difficult time because the person who had founded the college there that they were to teach in was supposed to guarantee that there was plenty of money to support the Jesuits and the college. And he backed out a little bit, or maybe more than a little bit, and the Jesuits were going through a period where they really had almost nothing. And St. Ignatius learned of that, and so he wrote them a letter in August of that year, explaining to them many of the things about poverty that he felt himself, because what he realized was that even though there might be a real virtue to accepting poverty voluntarily as a Jesuit and living a certain religious poverty, when push came to shove and the actual experience of poverty, accepted perhaps not so voluntarily, one had trouble accepting that. One had trouble seeing how in this the will of God could be lived out. And so as we kind of pursue St. Ignatius in his counter-cultural understanding of what faith does to our perspective on life, it's really important to see what he thought in this particular situation and would have been extended to other situations. So he wrote what really amounts to a letter that praises poverty for many different things. And let's look at some of those things. He says that poverty, first of all, is something that one is going to naturally gravitate to just meditating upon Jesus naked upon the cross. That if our Lord reached that extreme of poverty, how are we going to complain when we have to suffer through some sort of poverty too? He also mentions in many different ways how the Lord lived a life of poverty even before his death on the cross. His mother did, his apostles, everyone that he seemed to deal with was poor. And in fact, the Gospel, St. Ignatius points out, when the Lord tells John the Baptist to understand that he is the Messiah, he cites those words, the poor have the good news preached to them. And so the poor have this special role as the ones where Jesus came to them, but also the very life of poverty that Jesus accepted gives to poverty a remarkable kind of recommendation to us all. Then he talks about how poor people, in so many ways, are saved from a lot of the vices that wealthy people have to go through, whether that be pride or greed or something like that. You know, the poor are very, very simple. Not that they're simple, but that their lives are saved from spending money on things that aren't good, and on vices in many ways. He also talks about how the poor become, and then what one does for them through the end of the Gospel of Matthew, they become the place where Christ is incarnated. These are my least brothers and sisters. What you do for them, you do for me. So they have a very powerful role to play. And so Ignatius in all of this points out that the effects of living in poverty, of living dependent on other people, is going to bring to one sometimes effects that mimic, imitate, or just like the effects that poverty has on those that do not choose it voluntarily. Why do I talk about this? What can we learn from this? I think what we can learn from this is that we who speak so little in praise of poverty need to perhaps change our perspectives. We may not need to change our lives. Maybe our lives now are very simple, but maybe they're not. And that if we begin to speak and to think in terms of the advantages of poverty, maybe we'll begin to see and think differently about how we live our lives. And that's the wisdom of St. Ignatius for today.